That Tuesday morning, the terminal was still slowly waking up, enveloped in a silence broken only by the sound of suitcase wheels gliding over the shiny floor. Sophia Mendez walked calmly, wearing beige linen trousers, an immaculate white blouse, and flat sandals. Her hair, tied up in a simple bun, revealed the serene face of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. At 42, she had left her career as head of flight attendants, not for lack of love for the profession, but by personal choice, a choice made out of love. Since then, she had led a more discreet life, away from the spotlights and hierarchies of aviation. That day, she was boarding alone, with her e-ticket in hand and a contained smile, heading toward an unknown destination. Eduardo, her husband, had planned everything as a birthday surprise, and even though she didn't know where she was going, she trusted, because she had always trusted him. Upon entering the first-class cabin, Sophia felt a weight in the air. It wasn't the fatigue of travel or the strong scent of luxury perfume freshly sprayed by a nearby passenger. It was something subtler yet more aggressive: the looks. The cabin was filled with people dressed as if they were walking billboards, discreetly displaying symbols of status while speaking in a rehearsed tone of superiority. She, with her unbranded bag and makeup-free face, stood out in that constructed scene. One step toward her seat was all it took for the judgments to begin. A man raised his eyebrows. A lady pursed her lips. And then, as if summoned by the collective discomfort, a flight attendant appeared. Rigid posture, bun meticulously fixed, and a mechanical smile. "Excuse me, madam. Economy class is on the other side." The phrase was laced with condescension, as if she already knew that Sophia did not belong there. If this story has touched you in some way, now's the time to enjoy it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's so much powerful content coming your way. The confusion in Sophia's eyes lasted only a second. She had experienced this before, in other situations, with different clothes, different contexts, but never with such intensity. She took a deep breath, pulled the printed ticket from her bag. She liked the paper. It was easier to show without having to unlock any screen, and handed it to the flight attendant with the calm assurance of someone who knows she is right. "First class, seat 1A. The employee looked at the paper, then at the paper again. The discomfort was evident. She was trying to find some flaw, some mistake that could justify what her gaze had already condemned. Sophia waited silently, noticing whispers starting around her. A lady with a pearl necklace whispered something to her husband. A young man in a light blazer pulled his cell phone from his pocket, as if he were about to record something. The atmosphere was one of collective judgment, as if everyone were deciding right there whether she deserved to be in that space. And the most perverse part, none of them needed to say anything, just their looks were enough. It was at that moment that the flight attendant tried one last card. "Are you sure there wasn't a mistake in the reservation? Maybe it's an unwarranted upgrade. That happens sometimes." Sophia looked at the woman firmly, not arrogantly, but with the dignity of someone who refuses to be diminished. "I'm sure. This is my seat." The ensuing silence was uncomfortable even for those not involved. Still, the employee hesitated. She didn't move. She didn't make way. She stood there like a human gatekeeper, preventing someone who, apparently, did not meet the visual standard of the traveling elite. The situation was bordering on public embarrassment, but Sophia did not retreat. "Excuse me, please." That's what she said, before taking a step forward and occupying her seat. Seat 1A was clean, fresh-smelling, and intact, as much hers as the name printed on the ticket. But the peace in that moment was an illusion. Something was still to come. When the flight attendant finally moved away, still visibly perturbed, Sophia felt her stomach churn. She sat down calmly, adjusted her bag on her lap, and tried to control her breathing. On the outside, she maintained her composure. On the inside, her heart beat fast. It wasn't the first time she had encountered prejudice, but there was something especially cruel about being treated as a fraud in front of so many. It didn't hurt for her own sake, but for knowing how many others might have given up occupying their rightful places after being shamed like that. As she thought this over, a younger flight attendant appeared and offered her water. The gesture was mechanical, without eye contact. Sophia accepted with a slight nod, and as she took her first sip, she felt that the trip, originally planned as a surprise, was turning into a test. The next few minutes were silent torture. Every passenger who passed by her cast a curious or suspicious look. A man with a well-groomed mustache, seated in seat 2C, leaned over and asked a colleague if the woman up front was really in the right place. The question was not whispered, it was deliberately audible. Sophia heard it. She pretended not to, but inside she wondered if the discomfort would ever lessen. It was like being exposed in a display case where everyone judged, yet no one knew her story. No one there knew how many early mornings she had spent in airports, how many red-eye flights she had commanded, how many emergencies she had resolved mid-air. No one knew that that seat wasn't a luxury. It was, in fact, a symbol of everything she had built and achieved. But no one asked, and for now, she preferred to keep that silent. When the last passenger boarded and the doors were closed, the cabin quieted down. The crew's movements became more technical and less social, and the captain initiated the takeoff procedures. Sophia looked out the window but saw nothing but her own reflection, a serene woman on the outside, exhausted on the inside. She felt divided between two versions of herself, the one who had faced far tougher situations with courage, and the one who now felt invisible and diminished by silent judgments. The plane picked up speed and took off, slicing through the sky with the power she knew so well. For years, that sound signified work, routine, safety. Now, it was just the beginning of a journey where everything seemed to be spiraling out of control. Sophia took a deep breath and tried to find some peace in the constant hum of the engines. But that day, not even the sky seemed a good place to escape. About 20 minutes after takeoff, the same flight attendant who had embarrassed her earlier returned with a rehearsed smile. "Would you like to see the first-class menu?" The phrase, although formal, sounded like a provocation. Sophia nodded calmly and received the menu as if picking up any ordinary piece of paper. She wasn't hungry, nor was she thirsty. What she really wanted was to understand how something as simple as being in her own seat could turn into an event of humiliation. While pretending to look at the options, she overheard the voice of a passenger further back casually comment, "Nowadays, anyone can get a ticket like this, right?" The remark hit like a sharp knife. It wasn't addressed directly to her, but it was about her, and that was what hurt. The nonchalance with which exclusion masqueraded as an opinion, the ease with which it spread, with no one feeling responsible. Then, the unexpected happened. While the passengers were still murmuring among themselves, the cabin door opened again, a rare occurrence mid-flight. One of the head flight attendants entered, accompanied by a tall man with a well-groomed beard, a dark suit, and a firm look. His presence caused an immediate impact. It was as if a new authority had entered the scene. Sophia lifted her eyes and froze. "Eduardo!" Her heart beat faster, but she said nothing. Neither did he speak immediately. He walked over to her seat with measured steps, his face serious, and stopped beside where she was sitting. His eyes swept across the cabin as if surveying a scene of silent disaster. The mood changed. Those who had been murmuring now fell silent. There was something about his presence that paralyzed everyone, a mix of power, control, and something harder to define, as if everyone there suddenly realized they had made a grave mistake. Eduardo did not raise his voice. He did not show anger either. He simply asked, "Are you all right, my love?" That phrase, spoken naturally and firmly, hit like a bomb. The woman who moments before was judged as an interloper was now addressed as "my love" by a man who, by the way the crew had treated him upon entering, clearly held more authority than everyone there. The flight attendant who had questioned Sophia's presence paled. Eduardo then turned to her, still in the same tone. "This is my wife, and she is also the most respected former head of flight attendants this company has ever had. Perhaps you don't know her, but many here still remember who she is." The silence was absolute. Sophia felt her legs trembling, not out of shame, but from the weight of that truth spoken aloud. It was as if, finally, someone had returned her to the place they had tried to snatch away. Eduardo didn't stop there. With the same cutting serenity, he turned to the other. "Passengers, I believe that everyone here values excellence, right? Because it was she who for years ensured that flights like this were synonymous with safety, respect, and humanity." His eyes scanned each face one by one, unhurriedly. "Sophia Mendez is the kind of person you only notice when she isn't there. Because when she is, everything works. And you know what else? She never used my last name to open any doors. Not even when she could have, because she believes in merit. Something that today seems scarce around here." The flight attendant took a step back, visibly disconcerted. Eduardo approached her and gently added, "We'll talk more when we land. There's a new training program being launched, and you will be the first to participate." The employee simply nodded, speechless. The hierarchy had changed, not because of a title, but because of the truth. Gradually, the tension dissolved, giving way to an embarrassed silence. Sophia remained seated, still processing. Everything. She felt a mixture of relief and exposure. This wasn't the kind of recognition she sought. She didn't want to be defended just because she was the wife of someone important. But at the same time, there was something deeply just in hearing those people acknowledge who she truly was, not the image they had created, but her real story. Eduardo sat next to her, touched her hand gently and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner." Sophia squeezed his hand back. "You arrived at just the right time." She knew that that phrase carried more than it seemed. It was about her, about him, about everything they had built together. And at that moment, she felt whole again, rescued not by a grand gesture, but by someone who knew her worth and never stopped seeing it. If you're feeling this turnaround with Sophia, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. It might be more important than it seems. The rest of the flight passed with an artificial calm. People avoided looking at Sophia, as if trying to erase their own shame. The flight attendant passed by a few times, always reserved, not showing the slightest sign of the authoritarianism she had displayed earlier. Now everything was about restraint, caution, masks. Sophia, for her part, maintained the elegance she always had. She neither mocked nor retaliated, nor did she flaunt her new advantageous position. She simply remained there, being who she always was. When the captain announced the approach for landing, Eduardo leaned slightly toward her. "I want to take you to a special place, a birthday present, just for you." She smiled with her eyes without asking anything. She knew that with him, surprises always came with intention. And at that moment, more than a destination, she needed a new beginning. The car waiting for them at the airport took them to a seaside resort, one of those quiet places with discreet service and a landscape that seemed hand-drawn. Once in the room, with bare feet on, the balcony and the sound of the sea in the background, Sophia felt her body relax for the first time that day. Eduardo brought a glass of wine, sat next to her, and began to speak straightforwardly. "All that on the plane. I wanted it to be just a special trip, but it ended up revealing something I already knew. I miss you." Sophia looked at him, curious. He continued, "In the company, in aviation, in decisions. You have a look that no one else has, and more than that, you have a story that needs to keep being written." She remained silent, absorbing those words carefully. That compliment was neither empty nor formal. It came from someone who saw her in her entirety, with past, present, and future. Then Eduardo opened a slim leather folder and took out an envelope. Inside was an official proposal from Stellar Airways. Position: Director of Customer Experience. The role was new, created especially to rethink service protocols and combat, at the root, the structural prejudices that corroded the company's culture. It's yours if you want it, not because of what happened today, but because you are the most capable person I know for this. Sophia held the paper with steady hands. She read every line with attention, her heart oscillating between enthusiasm and doubt, not because of the challenge, she loved challenges, but because that invitation reopened something she had long left dormant, her independence. She looked at Eduardo, who watched her silently, and said only, "You knew I would need this, didn't you?" He nodded. "Even before you realized." Night fell slowly, dyeing the sky in warm hues, and Sophia allowed herself to lie in the balcony hammock, her eyes fixed on the tranquil darkness of the sea. She thought about everything that had happened that single day, how the judgments of others could still hurt, even when one is fully aware of one's own worth. But more than that, she thought about the possibility of returning to work, not out of pride or financial necessity, but for purpose. Because she felt that she still had much to offer. That proposal was more than just a job. It was a rescue, a reunion with who she was before the titles, before marriage, before giving up herself in the name of a calmer life. Eduardo came closer, lay down beside her, and for the first time that day, the two remained in absolute silence. It was the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between those who truly love each other and recognize one another even in the hardest moments. The next morning, even before breakfast was served, Sophia had made her decision. She got up early, put on a light blue linen blouse, the same one she wore when she was first promoted as head flight attendant, and sat at the table with the contract. She read every clause once more, now with a technical, professional, analytical gaze. Eduardo respected her silence, staying nearby without interfering. When she finally signed, she didn't smile. She just took a deep breath, as if closing an old chapter and opening a completely new one. That signature wasn't an impulsive return, nor a reaction to what had happened on the flight. It was a mature, conscious choice. It was about reclaiming autonomy, occupying the space she had built through years of dedication and excellence. And above all, it was about being remembered not as someone's wife, but as Sophia Mendez, on her own merits. Later, already in the resort lounge, Sophia turned on her cell phone and saw dozens of messages and notifications. Some came from former colleagues, others from strangers. The video of the incident had been discreetly posted by a passenger and was beginning to circulate on social media. She watched in silence, seeing herself from the outside for the first time. She observed her own face in the humiliation, her posture, her calm. Then she saw Eduardo coming in, and the scene changed course. In a few seconds, everything was there. The judgment, the embarrassment, the turnaround. Most of the comments were supportive, people saying they had been through similar situations, folks moved by seeing someone react with dignity. But what caught Sophia's attention the most was a private, short, and simple message. "Today you gave me courage. Thank you for being here." That, more than any job title, bonus, or new position, confirmed something. She was exactly where she needed to be. In the days that followed, Sophia immersed herself in her new role with the same dedication that had always accompanied everything she did. It wasn't easy. Changing a corporate culture is more complex than changing protocols. It involved listening to stories, facing veiled resistances, and disarming wounded egos. But she was not intimidated. Her presence in meetings, her direct yet empathetic stance, and her unquestionable track record made even the most skeptical reconsider their certainties. The flight incident, even though unplanned, ended up serving as a starting point for something bigger. The company now embraced a new discourse, and more importantly, began to practice it. Sophia made it a point to speak personally with every employee involved, including the flight attendant, not to punish, but to show firmly the real impact that judgments can have. And in that specific meeting, something unexpected happened. The flight attendant, visibly nervous, apologized. Not those automatic apologies uttered out of obligation. It was a sincere, choked apology coming from someone who had been confronted not only with her mistake, but with her own conscience. The truth is, I saw myself in that cabin, someone trying to prove she belonged, and I was frightened by your presence because, in some way, you reminded me of what I still haven't achieved. Sophia listened silently. She didn't respond immediately. She understood the weight behind that confession. After a few seconds, she said simply, "Then achieve it," but without stepping on anyone along the way. The flight attendant nodded, her eyes brimming. It was then, in that discreet moment without an audience, that Sophia realized her mission in that place went beyond the job title. She was there to remind people what it means to be human, and in that simple gesture, she found the meaning of being back, not to relive the past, but to transform the present. Shortly afterward, Sophia was invited to share her experience at an internal company event. She didn't like the stage much, but she understood that this was a chance to give voice to something greater than herself. She stepped onto the auditorium stage without makeup, as she had on the day of the flight, wearing the same white blouse and linen trousers. She recounted what she had experienced, with details, but without anger. She spoke of the looks, the assumptions, the silent imposition of shame by others. And then she spoke of what came next, the choice not to be silent, of the value of being recognized for what one builds rather than what one wears. When she finished, the room fell into an absolute silence. There was no immediate applause. There was a pause filled with emotional digestion. And then finally, the applause came, not as empty praise, but as a sign of understanding. People who saw themselves in that story, people who, from that moment on, would do things differently. At the end of that day, back at home, Sophia looked at the old boarding pass she had kept, the same one she had handed to the flight attendant at the very beginning, now carefully folded inside an envelope with the date handwritten on it. She smiled, not as someone who had won a contest, but as someone who had survived a test of identity. She thought about everything she had had to silence in order to be taken seriously. She thought about the times she had conformed so as not to stand out too much. And then, for the first time in a long time, she felt she owed nothing to anyone anymore, neither explanations nor proofs. There alone she understood that the greatest luxury someone can have, more than the seat, the last name, or the status, is to be treated with respect. And at that moment, she knew. It didn't matter what she wore or who people thought she was. Sophia Mendez was back, whole. Months later, already established in her new role, Sophia began traveling frequently, not as a common passenger anymore, nor just as an observer. Now her presence on each flight was strategic, almost symbolic. She would board incognito, without a uniform, without a badge, without any announcements. She observed the service, listened to conversations, sat next to unknown passengers, and asked simple but incisive questions. It was the kind of silent leadership that transformed without needing a stage. On one of those trips, she was approached by a new employee who recognized her name while confirming the passenger manifest. "Are you Sophia Mendez?" the young woman asked hesitantly. Sophia smiled slightly. "I am." The young woman smiled back. "They had told me about you during training. They said it was because of you that everything changed." Sophia didn't reply. She simply thanked her with a discreet nod. She didn't need trophies. That was more than enough. That same day, as she watched through the window, the sky clearing after a mild turbulence, Sophia felt a different kind of peace. It wasn't the relief of having weathered a storm. It was the certainty of someone who had gone through something big and emerged on the other side with a clearer sense of self. She no longer thought of the incident as something shameful, but as a necessary turning point. She knew that the world wouldn't change overnight. The looks, the prejudices, the judgment still existed, but she now occupied a space where she could act influence and re-educate, and that was more than she had ever dreamed of when she left aviation. Upon landing, before leaving the aircraft, she scanned the cabin. No one knew, but that was her way of giving thanks for being alive, for having endured, and for having chosen, even amidst the pain, not to be silent. Sophia Mendes didn't need to be noticed to be gigantic. She simply was. And if this story touched you, leave your like, share it, and subscribe. We need to spread more respect out there.